Welcome to our latest Hippocratic Adventures chat. I'm your host, Dr. Shwini Bapat. And if you're joining us for the first time, this is the place where we talk about everything related to practicing medicine abroad. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to download your free ebook, which walks you through the 3 steps to starting your adventure. Head over to hippocraticadventures.com/subscribe to kickstart your adventure. And before we get started, I want to say a big thank you to Global Medical Staffing and locumstory.com for sponsoring this vlog. Today, we're very excited to have a physician couple, Dr. Holly and Paul Llobet, with us. Holly Llobet is a triple boarded physician in internal medicine, critical care, and palliative and hospice medicine. She completed her residency and fellowship at Mount Sinai in New York, and she's currently working locums in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, as an intensivist. She worked locums for the past 4 years. Outside of medicine, she's physically very active and recently actually did a half Ironman triathlon in Taiwan with doctors and nurses that she met while traveling locums. We also have with us Dr. Paul Llobet, who is board certified in internal medicine and has a master's in business. He did his residency at Mount Sinai as well, and he's currently working locums on the Navajo Nation Indian Reservation in New Mexico as a hospitalist. He and Holly actually met the first day of medical school in Guadalajara, Mexico. And they've been married for over 20 years, and they have a son who is currently in his 2nd year of EM residency. And of course, before we get started, make sure to smash that subscribe button, sit back, and enjoy. So thank you so much for joining me today. We are recording this actually the day after Thanksgiving, and you're in Miami right now, so I greatly appreciate you taking the time out to chat with me.
We're happy to be here. It's great to be here, and we're stuffed after the day of Thanksgiving, and thankful for being able to do international locums and talking to you.
Wonderful. So actually, tell me a little, maybe we'll start with Holly. Tell me about your story, because in the bio that you sent me, actually, you mentioned in there, which I didn't include because I thought we would talk about it, that you actually lived in 16 different states by the time you were 16. So how did that affect your outlook on what you saw as a career? Like, what impact did that have on you?
Well, my dad was an engineer, and he built power plants, and it takes about a year to build a power plant. So once the job was done, we would move. So I was always the new girl in school, coming in the middle of the year. So I just was used to moving around and always being in a new place. So traveling to me is just the norm. And so I always enjoyed being in a new place. So I'm comfortable traveling.
That makes a lot of sense. And then Paul, you actually mentioned that you were born and raised in Miami, but your parents immigrated from Bolivia, I think, right before you were born. So how did that kind of affect some of your career choices?
So I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and my parents came to the country back in '68, where my father completed medical school in Bolivia and did his residency training in New Jersey, first Englewood, New Jersey. And when he completed his internal medicine, he moved to Miami to do a fellowship in cardiology, and hence I came along.
Okay.
I guess I was always intrigued in medicine and healthcare just by seeing my father. Remember as a kid going to the hospital with him, doing rounds with him and the weekends, and just never thought I would do anything different.
And both of you, which I think is actually very unique, both of you went to medical school in Mexico, in Guadalajara, Mexico. So what made you decide to attend medical school in Mexico? And then, of course, are you fluent in Spanish then? So tell us about that, because that's really, really special.
I actually got into med school in the US, but I was super broke and couldn't afford it. Mexico was a lot cheaper, and I was kind of up for an adventure. I didn't speak a word of Spanish when I got there. So just my college advisor had said, well, there's this representative from this school in Mexico coming to talk about med school, so you should go to this information session and check it out. So I went, and it turned out to be a lot cheaper and I could afford it. So after going to this information session, it turned out that it was something I could do. And so I just got on a plane and went and winged it and learned a little bit of Spanish and met him, and it worked out.
So was medical school in Spanish then, or was it in English?
It was in Spanish. I know. The first 2 years were kind of Spanglish, a little bit of English, a little bit of Spanish. The tests initially were in English, the first 2 years, and then they were in Spanish, but they let you have a Spanish-English dictionary. So you could look it up, but the tests were timed. So, and then you could buy the books in English and in Spanish. So I bought them in Spanish, but then would translate and write in English above the Spanish to learn to read the books, so that I could read the tests, and just eventually kind of learned along the way. And a lot of the medical words are similar in English and Spanish, and just kind of figured it out.
That is incredible, because I would say medical school is hard enough when you're doing it in English or your native language, but to add that mix of I don't actually know any Spanish when I arrived, and to be translating between languages, I think is incredible.
Yeah, my biggest issue always was dolor is pain, and dollar is dollar, like money. And I'd always say tienes dolor, meaning do you have pain? And they always thought I was saying, do you have any money? Have giving me money. And I'm like, no, dolor. And then the doctor would always say it in Spanish, and I'm like, that's what I said. So that was always my most difficult word to say correctly.
That's hilarious. And so what was that experience like then for you, Paul? Because your family was actually, perhaps they were Spanish speaking, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As a child at home, I only spoke Spanish until I got to school. So that was easy. And the transition for me was quite easy in Mexico. As Holly was saying, a lot of the curriculum was predominantly Spanish, and mostly because when you're dealing with the Spanish in the clinics, in the hospital, all Spanish speakers, so you had to kind of learn it in that respect. But I had a little bit of an easier time.
I can imagine. And so then so what's really interesting is that actually both of you experienced, Holly, you moved around a lot. Paul, you experienced two cultures, and then Holly, actually, in moving to Mexico and doing medical school there, you also experienced two cultures. So when did you start having, actually, your first abroad experience, it sounds like, was in medical school. But after that, when you went to residency and fellowship, at what point did you start engaging in work outside the US?
Yeah, I think Holly and I, we might be too close to each other. I think this is the thing. So when we were working when we finished our residency program, we opened up a private practice in Manhattan. And Holly continued on into fellowship program. So we stayed in New York City for a couple of years, and then we moved upstate New York on her completion of her residency program to another facility where she started doing critical care, and I was in the primary care world. I had two practices, one in a kind of decent sized city, and then one in a very rural setting in upstate New York. We did that for about 20 years. Our son had already grown up. He had already graduated college, and we were in a state of transition. We were like, okay, here we are. We're young, relatively. We're still pretty active, and we should try something different. Sort of the cards aligned as the hospital system where we were working at had been recently taken over by a large organization. And it changed the culture quite a bit. Nothing wrong with it. It was just different than what we liked. And we said, okay, this is the opportunity. We're going. My wife had always told me for years, I want to live on the ocean. I want to live by the beach. So I found us two jobs in Guam. In the middle of nowhere, Guam. I didn't even know where Guam was on a map when I first spoke with the recruiter. I had to Google it. And I said, let's do it, 6 months. So I come home, I tell my wife, we're leaving. She's like, what are you talking about? We're leaving. I'm like, you've always wanted to do this. We're just going. So we flew to Guam and ended up doing 6 months in there. And it was a great segue because you had to work 1 to 2 weeks on, and then you had 1 to 2 weeks off. And all we did was travel. So we worked our 2 weeks in Guam, and then we went to Palau for a week scuba diving. We came back, worked another week, and we went to northern Japan, Niseko, to go skiing. And we came back and we did another trip to another island in Yap. And then boom, COVID hits, and no one's going anywhere. But we ended up staying in Guam and just continued working. And I think once that bug set in of the travel and the experience and the learning of the new cultures, and we were just having fun again. It was just exciting, and we haven't looked back since.
And so Guam was your first experience in a while, it sounded like, of working outside the US. So were you, it sounded like you were looking for something different. Were you afraid at any point? Like, were you scared about that experience, or did you feel like you had enough clinical experience at that point under your belt to go out and try something different? Because Guam is far, right?
You're right. And I think that the nice thing is it was maybe kind of a baby step into the adventure, because Guam still being a U.S. territory, you still had the comforts of home. So, you get into this remote island, but it's like the biggest little island on earth. I use the expression because, you have Home Depot, you have, Macy's, you have, all the comforts that you would have anywhere else, but you're stuck in the middle of the ocean in a small island. Everything is in English. The cultural, although the Chamorro people have their own sort of culture, it's still generally an American culture. So it was a small segue. I guess the biggest thing that we were learning originally at first was the limited resources. So you don't have all the consultants, you don't have all the equipment, you don't have things that anything that was severe had to be flown to Hawaii, which is a 7-hour flight. And sometimes people would be flown to the Philippines or for a higher level of care. So learning, getting used to that really taught us to hone in our skills of, hey, you might be a little bit on your own here. You need to feel comfortable with your skill set. I do credit a lot of that experience to Mexico, because I think Mexico threw us to the wolves of, hey, you're doctors, you're gonna know everything. You're not gonna just be able to call for help all the time. You have to be able to be self-sufficient. And that made us more confident as we, stayed in the system. And then as we were going to more remote areas, I worked in Saipan, which is even more remote. I worked in some of the islands in the Caribbean, working in Navajo Nation and the reservation. There's very limited resources there, even though, again, in the U.S., you just started feeling comfortable and had to really get down to the basics of medicine again.
Wow. That sounds very different because, in most of the places I worked, calling a consultant was very easy. And a lot of the procedures in internal medicine and stuff were done by consultants. So the idea of having to do more of that on your own and actually using it as an opportunity to actually build up your skill set again
Right.
is pretty incredible. So it sounds like Guam was kind of the turning point. It was one of the experiences that then launched other experiences. After Guam, is that when you then worked in, what other places have you worked in, I guess? And Holly, you can chime in as well, though I think you are muted currently.
Okay. Yeah. We originally had said we'll do 6 months. So I took a sabbatical from my job, which I loved my job. I had been there for 11 years. I was kind of mad at him because I'm like, I don't want to leave my job. I love my job. But perspective's everything, because once I got to Guam, I realized that job's not that great. And I was like, I'm never going back after I had tried something else. And then COVID came, which changed my life dramatically, especially being in critical care. Got quite burnt out. Guam just was annihilated by COVID. And I had also worked in Phoenix and California during COVID, short breaks. In Phoenix, I actually had 60 vented patients by myself, which was overwhelming. And then I ended up working in St. Martin in a shipping container with COVID patients with very limited resources. We had ventilators from the Vietnam War and one dialysis machine in a shipping container, no x-ray, no CAT scan, nothing. That's all we had. So we really had to MacGyver and figure stuff out. We were on our own in a parking lot of a school. Wow. So that was really interesting. And Paul actually worked there with me. We worked there. I was there for a year. And I'm trying to remember where else we worked. Those were my main 2 jobs. And then we're off to New Zealand in January for our next job. But Paul's done a few other international places in addition.
And so you talked about how you loved your job in New York, it sounded like, but then you had this experience in Guam, and then you had this experience in St. Martin's. What was it about those experiences that made you be like, you know what, I don't want to go back to the job I had that I thought I loved?
I realized that the EMR and all of that charting and clicking and how much time I spent sitting in front of the computer that in international medicine you don't do. I got back to spending time with the patient and families and just doing medicine instead of charting. I didn't realize how much time I was spending charting and filling out forms. And I really enjoyed just getting back to medicine and how much administration was controlling my day. And when you enter international medicine, you decide how you're going to manage the patients. And administration really is in the background quite a bit. So there's not very much of that. And I also was director of critical care. So I spent a lot of time in meetings. And I really, meetings were very minimal. So it was nice to have more freedom, and my duty hours were much less. I didn't spend as much time at work. So I had much more free time, much less burnt out. Even though it was COVID, I did not spend as much time at work. They just value your mental health and free time much more in other countries. So it was a better work-life balance.
Wow. And so then outside of work, what are some things that you were able to explore or do that maybe you weren't able to do before or you didn't have time for before?
Yeah, I mean, the island of Guam, first of all, was so beautiful. So I had, like Paul had said, I always wanted to live on the ocean. But in the US, you know, a critical care job, you're doing 12-hour days. So I would get up in the dark and come home in the dark. So what's the point of living on the ocean? But in Guam, we used to say we'd be swimming in the ocean and we're like, this isn't vacation, it's Tuesday. So we would be swimming on the beach and exploring the island and going on hikes. And we actually had time to do things. And our schedule was 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So we initially were scuba diving in Yap, and we went to Palau, and we were skiing in Japan. So we did have time to do a lot of things, and our schedules were linked together. So it was kind of like we were on a honeymoon half the time. So we did actually renew our relationship together because we were working so much in New York. Our schedules weren't syncing together very well. We hardly saw each other when we were in New York. So it was kind of like we got to have a honeymoon every 2 weeks, which was nice.
That sounds awesome. And it sounds like in having this experience in Guam, not only did you go back to practicing clinical medicine in a way that you enjoyed, but yeah, I mean, reconnecting with your husband, having time outside of medicine, you know what, you're right. I remember my critical care rotations, and you were up in the morning and going home at night, and you didn't see the sun.
Yeah.
So that sounds like that's been a really good change.
Some of the difference, if I can add, is you know, in the U.S. you always hear the catchphrase, you know, we're a patient-centered organization, or we're a patient-centered facility, and in all intents and purposes, I truly believe that's what they think they're doing, and that's what they hope to do. But you become so administrative heavy. And whether you're dealing with EHR or EMR systems, whether you're dealing with the new whatever topics that they're doing, you know, patient-centered homes or medical villages and all this stuff, we're all trying to do that achievement. And I think we're slowly detaching ourselves from, you know, from the actual patient. You know, some of the most complaints patients give is that my doctor looks at the computer more than me, right? Because you're typing as quick as you can. And it's just the consequences that developed in trying to advance the healthcare system. But when we were going into these other areas, we came back and we're like, holy cow, like I'm spending 50 minutes out of the hour with the patient and only 10 minutes otherwise, as opposed to the other way around. And then you started kind of catching that bug again. The reason why we went to medical school, we all had that little bug, that little love, that little like, this is exciting, you know, this is cool. And now you're doing those cool things that you were doing in medical school. And so there was a few times where, you know, we came back stateside, right? And we had some lulls in between the international assignments. So we were doing some domestic assignments. And although we had a different attitude and a different perception, we still kept telling ourselves after a couple of weeks or a couple of months, we're just like, it's starting to get that administrative heavy feeling again. We need to find something, right? So we teasingly, we call our recruiters and I'm like, all right, it's time to go. Like, where are you sending us? And we've had several opportunities. Obviously, I've done some of the Caribbean islands and the U.S. Virgin Islands and other Caribbean islands. But we've had opportunities in Bermuda. We've had opportunities in Iceland. I almost had an opportunity in Saudi Arabia, which was could have been crazy, but it was only for one of us, so I didn't choose that. And then now the New Zealand, and we were interviewed. We did 3 rounds of interviews and almost got selected to go to Guangzhou, China for a year.
Yeah.
Which was kind of, we were like, this is going to be cool, but is it? You know, because that's really different. But the second wave of COVID hit, or the third wave, and
Yeah.
that never materialized. But we're always looking for that outside the box adventure, and just go for it, and really just being in front of the patient. It's really it's not scary, because it's the same thing. It's healthcare, right? It's healthcare, and you know, you're really good at what you do. You just sometimes forget, you lose that love, and once you get back in love with what you're doing, it's fun. And you only just have to adapt to, you know, the diets and the foods and the cultures and stuff like that. But that's the exciting part.
You know, that is a very common thing that I've heard amongst physicians who have had an experience abroad, is that in going abroad, they actually like found that joy again in medicine. They were like, oh, wow, this is actually cool. I love what I'm doing. Like, this is actually really interesting. So I think it's so interesting that sometimes, and sometimes they're doing this in countries where they don't speak the local language, like in St. Martin's. Don't they speak like French or Dutch or?
French and Dutch. And yeah, in my ICU, I had 6 patients. They all spoke a different language, and none of them was English. So I use Google Translate like crazy, and I love all the different languages. And you find that you can function fine in languages you don't speak. So I love it. And I
Wow.
love all the different cultures, and trying to figure out the cultural nuances and differences, and how different they are from yours, and the food, and I just love it.
That's amazing. And I do think that's interesting, right? That people in leaving what they know, and I would actually say in some ways, when you're not speaking the local language, it's in some ways harder, right? But for some reason, even that challenge, that toughness, is still like balanced by the fun that they experience, or by like, oh wait, this is why I went into medicine in the first place. So I always find that really fascinating, that people have had to leave the experience they knew in the US to find that joy again.
We did a couple of missions, medical missions, where we worked 2 years in Tibet, not 2 full years, but we went 2 separate occasions to Tibet, where you had nothing. I mean, we didn't even have running water or electricity when we were working in some of these places. And then 1 year we did an orphanage in Nepal, which also had nothing. We brought 2 or 3 military duffel bags of donated supplies that we got from, you know, colleagues of ours at the time, and just brought medicines and things, and didn't understand a lick of what they were saying, or or we had obviously translators, but even the translators weren't doing literal translations. You know, they were thinking that they were helping us, and I think we had the most fun there. You know, in Tibet and in Nepal. And we used to joke, because one of the missions, or 2 of the missions, we took our son with us, and our translators, we would ask a question like, do they have this, do they have that? And this answer was sometimes yes, sometimes no. We're just like, okay, is it no? So by the end of the mission, everything was sometimes yes, sometimes no. So we were just laughing, and okay, that's their problems. Sometimes yes and sometimes no. But again, you know, you get back to that clinical presentation where you're doing the physical exam, the auscultations, and then you're diagnosing disease processes, like, oh, the stethoscope really is used. You know, we really do have to put this in our ear. So that's I think that may be a good segue for people who want to say, hey, is this for me? You know, maybe they arrange themselves, let me do a medical mission for a week or so, get that outside experience, see what it's like, and say, hey, you know what, does this jive with my personality? And I think that I should have mentioned that before, but that was one of the first things we did before going to Guam, and we did have a good time when we did those mission work.
Okay, so before you went to Guam, you actually did try out like 1 or 2 weeks doing a medical mission to see if you liked it. And
Right.
okay, that's actually really important.
And
so go ahead.
March, we did a medical mission in India through Global Medical. They sent us on a mission that was amazing. That was truly amazing. And they sent us during the week of the Holy Festival, with all the colors, the color throwing and the flower. They throw flowers, and that was truly amazing. And they sent us all over Mumbai, and we went to orphanages and all different clinics, and that was truly rewarding and amazing. And
Yeah.
Can you speak to you've said amazing about that particular experience. What was it about that that was rewarding for you?
So the Global Medical is the recruiter that we've used for almost all our international assignments. They're based out of Utah, and they've been a great organization, a great locums company to send us. Very supportive in every place we've been.
Okay, so quickly, for those of you that don't know, Global Medical Staffing is a locum agency that places U.S. physicians in New Zealand, Australia, Guam, Saipan, the Caribbean, Canada, and of course the U.S. And they have also placed doctors in Singapore and the UAE, and they regularly expand their options. So if you're looking to move abroad, go check out their website.
And Holly was selected as a Global Medical had 5 doctors that they got to pick in conjunction, a collaborative deal with International Medical Relief, IMR. And they're the ones who established missions all over the world. And they're actually a fantastic organization because they set a team up of maybe 3 or 4 people, and then they kind of guide the doctors. They have all the logistics set up, what clinics we're going to go to, how we're going to equipment and things. So it's kind of like you're just going, and the only responsibility you have is your clinical skills and a good attitude. That's it. You don't have to bring stuff. You don't have to worry. And they set us up in Mumbai, and we met some of our very good friends that we've actually vacationed together with post, and we're still in contact with. And they set you up with the whole clinic, the whole transportation. So you just go, and then it just gives you the opportunity to embrace your surroundings and embrace that. And it's kind of like an easy intro to it. They were really great. And when you go on their websites, they have medical missions all over Africa, Asia, Europe, and they purposely do it in a region, in an area where the help is most needed, but yet they gave you a day or two to enjoy the area. Like you have a day off, and we had the Holly Festival as one of our days off, and that was cool. You know, I was just like, with this dye powder thrown all over flowers. That was just amazingly cool. That's the best part. But those type of organizations really just made the whole thing pleasant.
That's amazing. So an organization like Global Medical does the legwork in terms of organizing where you're going to be, taking care of any local credentialing that needs to happen. And that way you can just show up and do your part and do the clinical part.
Right.
That is actually such a huge help.
Very well organized. It was very safe. We didn't have to worry about anything. They had all the medicine. And just a really great group of people. They had translators, which they were college students from Mumbai, and those kids were so fun. They took us all over the city and introduced us to their music and culture and food, and it was so fun. It was so rewarding.
That's incredible. And so in all of your experiences abroad, because it sounds like just in the last 3 or 4 years, you've had these experiences. Is that correct? Because it sounded like it happened just a little bit before COVID that you started.
Yeah, we went to Guam November 2019.
Okay.
Where we had the assignment. Holly I went a month ahead. She had to still finish up work before she took her sabbatical. So she came December. So just from December to mid-January, we were saying, okay, we'll work a week, we travel a week, work a week, travel a week. And I think COVID probably hit us maybe mid to late February, where we started hearing about something funny around December. and then November, December, and then it just locked down in that late February, early March period. So that's when initially we started doing the long contracts and long assignments. Prior to that, our first mission in Tibet was 2014. We did another one in 16, and then one in the Nepal orphanage in 17.
Okay.
So those were a week. We went there for a week. We vacationed for a week somewhere nearby, and then flew back home. But I would say probably the first true experience was maybe back in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so in all of those experiences, one of the challenges that you faced sounded like it was limited resources in a lot of the places that you were in. What were some of the other challenges that you faced as you worked in so many different locations, actually?
I think some of the limited resources, definitely. Limited specialists, for sure. A lot of times there was, nobody to call. Language barrier, for sure. Just trying to figure out the culture initially. A lot of things that you would do in the US were offensive. And you didn't realize that you were doing something that wouldn't be proper for them. So just kind of learning the nuances of those things.
I would say
which were all challenging, and just getting around, just learning how to even get to work or get home from work, or all of that, just trying to find your way around, and just things, anytime being in a new hospital, how to use the computer, where are things, where's the ultrasound, where's the emergency room, where, all of that stuff of a new job, where's the scrubs, so just all the logistics of a new job. And how do you call the surgeon, how do you transport a patient? Oh, there is no higher level of care. I'm on an island and it's the only hospital, so there is no transferring to another hospital. It's the Philippines. They have to go on an airplane, and it's a commercial airplane, so they have to sit in coach, and there's no oxygen, so they're critical care. This is it. They're not going anywhere. So there's a lot of challenges and all I've worked on is islands, so there is nowhere to transport patients. So it's really interesting and very challenging. And during COVID, we ran out of everything. We don't have ABG kits anymore. We don't have rectal tubes. We ran out of propofol. We ran out of fentanyl. We intubated so much, we don't have any more clean laryngoscopes. We lost the plug to the glide scope, and it has no power anymore. It's just every minute there's a new problem.
Yeah, I think my one of my favorite, and not in a good way, in a bad way, stories is in the containers. It was a shipping container. If you think about a shipping container as anything else, and there were 5 of them connected to each other, kind of like a daisy chain, and that was your COVID unit. So you went from one container to the next, where the patients were, to the next container where the donning on or the donning off, it's new things. But one day we ran out of oxygen because the company who supplies our oxygen couldn't get there in time. So here we are with 4 or 5 patients. The entire staff is in the room with ambu bags, bagging them until they're figuring out how to get the portable oxygens from the nearby hospital. I think it took an hour. And that was just crazy. Like, who the heck thinks that you're going to run out of oxygen? But also some of the cultural things that I was going to add to Holly is her being in critical care is obviously a lot more intense, but it was the culture of death. Like, what is the cultural accepted protocols for how to explain death? I know some in like European areas, palliative care hospice care is a norm. It's an expected in the US, it's still a developing monster, right? It's still, people are still kind of think that that's a bad word. And then now in some of the cultural islands in Guam, we had people flown in from Polynesian islands. So we had Chuk and Pohnpei and Yap and all these that are completely different in their thought processes and their philosophies and their ability to understand. So that's a struggle that you first have to really dive into to say, okay, what are the expected cultural norms? And you also have to learn to kind of take a step back. And although you may feel like, 2 + 2 is 4, they may think 2 + 2 is 3. And sometimes we have to say, okay, it's 3, on the way you feel, and adapt in that way. So you do have to be open to that component.
Right.
Yeah. It sounds like being flexible is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
in
usually,
St. Martin, when patients were dying and you would have a family meeting and ask them about goals of care and DNR, DNI, and what do you want to do? And they would look at me like, what are you talking about? You think I'm a bad doctor, and you're the doctor. Why are you asking us? You should know. There's no such thing as a DNR, DNI, and asking the family. You're the doctor. You make the decision. You're the one with the knowledge, not the family. So there is no such thing as a DNR, DNI, or asking the family what they want, because the doctor makes all the decisions.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, it was very confusing to the family to be updating them and asking them questions. They're used to just being told, this is what we're doing. So I learned really quickly, you just tell them what we're going to do. We're intubating, we're not intubating. We're going to let them die, we're going to do PAL care, we're not.
Wow.
So that was a curve.
Wow. So now we're going to switch over to kind of the rapid fire part of this chat. So these are a series of questions that are fun, that are just meant to be kind of off the top answers, the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay, so the first question I'm going to ask you was actually, so we have this new thing where whoever I interview, I ask them what's one question they want me to ask the next person I talk to. And I don't know who the next person is going to be usually. So just a week or two ago, I was chatting with a physician named Christine Goins, and she wanted me to ask you, what is one thing you would do if you didn't have any fear? Just off the top.
I would quit my job.
Okay.
I would never.
Yeah, my wife quitting her job would be my biggest fear. I would say jumping out of an airplane would be my biggest fear. Skydiving.
Skydiving, yeah, I could understand that one as well. Go ahead.
No, the other thing is, in a work-related world, it would just be my biggest fear would be losing the love of medicine. Because right now, I've never been happier in the past couple of years, and I just enjoy going to these different places. So for me, is that I love it right now. So I can't imagine doing anything else, losing the ability to do that.
Wow.
Then when I say quit my job, I would just not work for money. I would just volunteer and just roam the world and not work for money, just volunteer.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what is the coolest thing you've done or coolest place you've visited in all of your experiences abroad?
I have two, and one of them work related, and the other vacation is we went through Lake Titicaca and Machu Picchu, Peru, Bolivia. And this was back in 2010, around that time. And being in that sacred valley and seeing the ruins of Machu Picchu, I felt an energy flow through the body. It was like a spiritual magnetic place, whatever your belief system is. It hit every single nerve in the body. And I had the exact same feeling when I was in a cave in Tibet with a monk who was his job was, I guess I forget the name of it, but he had to spend 1 year, 1 month, and 1 day in this one cave in prayer. And we walked up there to check on him as they did. And I was just like, holy cow, there's the energy in there. And there was nothing in there. It was just a guy in a cave with a prayer wheel and his beads, and he was just praying. And that also was just amazing. Those were the two places where I was like, wow.
Yeah, I was going to say that Tibetan experience on top of this mountain with no electricity and no running water, that entire 2 weeks in Tibet was just, the whole thing was an amazing experience. And then also the Galapagos Islands felt like just a different planet in a different world. Those two experiences were my favorite.
Those are pretty good.
Yeah.
And then what is one piece of advice you would give to a physician who is thinking about trying out an experience abroad, but is maybe on the fence, not sure?
I would say dream big and don't be afraid.
Yeah.
For it.
I would
Go for it.
I would say leave all your expectations behind. Don't go with any preconceived ideas of what you think it's going to feel like, or what you think you're going to accomplish, or what you think it's going to be. Just be an empty vessel and absorb it. And I think if you go in there with that open mind and expecting nothing, I think you're going to get the most reward, and you'll catch that bug, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I feel reinvigorated. I think if you go in with that attitude, you're never going to want to stop doing it.
That's really, really good advice from both of you. So Holly and Paul, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me in Miami, from Miami, on your holiday there. And I greatly appreciate your sharing your experience and your insights, and also showing your courage, I think, because you tried. I mean, you had an experience, you've had experiences throughout your life, but you started this, it sounds like maybe 20 years into your career, and you needed a change. And I think there are a lot of people that are in that place that are maybe in the middle of their career, or they may feel stagnant in their position or in their job, and they're looking for something that's going to reinvigorate them, that's going to remind them why they went into medicine in the first place. So thank you so much for sharing your story, because I do think it's really going to resonate with a lot of people.
Well, and for us, thank you for the opportunity to allow us to share a little bit of our experiences and our story. But again, yeah, it's a life-altering, life-changing path. So recommend it for anyone who is open for it.
Now, I'd love to hear from you. What would you hope to get out of an international locums gig? Let us know in the comments below. And once again, a big thank you to Global Medical Staffing and locumstory.com for sponsoring this post. And if you're looking to start your own adventure, then you're going to love our free ebook, How to Start Your Adventure. You can head over to hippocraticadventures.com/subscribe right now, where you'll learn the 3 steps to get going. And look, if you liked this conversation and you want more of it, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And the reason I want you to do that is because It really helps us reach more physicians who are looking to reinvigorate their career. They want to find that spark in medicine again, and they just don't know how to. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. And of course, if you liked it, make sure to share it with your colleagues or your friends. And with that, we wrap up another episode of Discovering Where Your White Coat Can Take You.